Try to show you how to install a local WordPress development environment on Ubuntu. And the first thing I will need to do, because I got halfway through this process and realized I needed to change some BIOS settings and had to shut everything down and realized I was also recording on the wrong screen, is I need to make sure that I've removed um, some software that we installed from the last bad video. So I wanted to actually show you how to do that because I thought that that might be helpful to see too. So specifically, I'm going to be looking at removing some package repos that I had added that my machine here would be downloading packages from. So I want to walk through that process again and kind of make sure that the whole process is covered. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to show you where those packages were added. Sorry, the repos were added. Package repos are added to a sources.list file or other files inside of a sources.list .d directory in your Etsy apt root if you do it through apt, if you add those packages and repos through apt. So if we look inside of here, we can see that we have a sources.list file, and I'm going to go ahead and um, open that up, and I'm going to show you what's down at the bottom there would have been added from the last uh, video that I had tried to make. So, whoops, didn't mean last. I meant them. I was going to do actually. No, I was going to do last. Let's see, apt. Oh, right, I had listed it. My bad. Let's see, apt sources.list. So down at the very bottom here, I had added some packages, some repos for adding packages while making the last video, and you can see I'd added the VirtualBox repo, and I had added the HashiCorp repo for my release of Ubuntu, which is Focal. And I'm going to try to remove those so that we can work through that from scratch, adding those. So I'm going to try to actually remove them using apt add apt repository remove to see if that will work. I am a little bit skeptical that it will, and I might need to just remove them from the file directly. However, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the software that I had installed through those repositories. So I'm going to run sudo apt remove to get rid of the software. I'm going to get rid of Vagrant, which you can see is at the bottom there. HashiCorp repo here is what I used to install Vagrant. So I'm going to run that. Okay, so Vagrant should be gone. And that's one that we'll be adding later. And now I'm going to also remove VirtualBox. I think it's 6.1. Yes, let's remove that. Okay, so I'm removing the software that I installed via those repositories that I had added. Now I'm going to attempt to remove those repositories themselves. So I'm going to try a sudo, and this is the command I use to add them, add apt repository. And I'm going to do remove, and then I'm going to pass in the names of those repositories that I'd added. So actually, let me get those again really quickly. Etsy, apt, and it is sources.list. So here's the first one. Here is VirtualBox. Let's do them in reverse order. Let's do HashiCorp first, which is what I used to install Vagrant. So I could have just tailed the second one, I guess, there, but I will go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to run sudo add apt move. And let's see if I pass this in, if this will work. Okay, let's tail it again. it did work. So that's good. So we can see that it is now missing from the list here, from that file with the list. One thing I actually forgot to run too is we have to remove the keys that we used to add those repositories. I want to check to see if those keys were removed for us, which would be key list. And let me check for, I had just removed HashiCorp. So let's grep those for HashiCorp. Okay, so it looks like it is still in there. So since I can see HashiCorp security is still in there, I think I'm going to have to remove those keys. So let's go ahead and remove the key for it too, and then we'll go back and do the same thing with the other package. So, so I'm going to do grep again, but I'm going to get a little more context to see the key ID here. So here's the HashiCorp key. And I want, if possible, to delete this key from my key list. I wonder if that's really the UID there. I could try that. Let's look up an example of delete key here. So it would be apt key delete. What is an example of a key ID? Yep, so we got our public there, yes. It's on the line labeled pub. Let me look at this list real quick. I believe this may be the key. We can try this here. So I'm going to try to remove, scroll up to the entry for Vagrant, which is, well, HashiCorp, which is here. I'm going to try to remove that key by copying this ID, what I'm assuming is the ID. We'll find out if we can remove it or not. And so I'll run apt key DL, and then I'm going to put in the key ID, what is hopefully the key ID. Okay, and let's see here if that was actually removed. I have to pipe that. I cannot tell what's going on there. Sorry. I don't see HashiCorp. Cool, so it looks like that was removed as well. So now we're going to repeat the process and hopefully it's a little smoother for removing the VirtualBox installation and the VirtualBox repository from my local apt sources, and then also removing the VirtualBox repository key from my key list. So I will run sudo, I don't believe I've removed VirtualBox yet, right? I don't think I installed it, but apt remove box 6.1, oops, 6.1. Okay, I think I had already removed it, so that's good. I had just forgotten. Okay, so already removed, don't need to try to remove that again. And now I am going to remove the repository for it. So again, let's take a look at the sources file. So you can see apt sources.list, and we're looking for VirtualBox, which is here. I'm going to go ahead and get the name of the repo here. and I'm going to run sudo add apt repository remove. Pass that in. And now if we tail that repo again, I need to do 2 commands up. The first one looks like we're good. So I'll check real quick because I'm still getting used to that. But if we go to less etc apt sources.list, we go to the bottom. Yep, we're good. Just making sure I've done that right. So, okay, so now to remove the key, apt key list grep 5, just to get some context to see around to get that actual ID, VirtualBox. Okay, so here's VirtualBox, and here's the key to remove. So I will copy that, and I will do sudo apt key del to remove it. I will pass that key in. And now, if I run apt key list grep VirtualBox, it doesn't return anything, which is great, except for a warning. So now we're set up with a clean sort of install. We've removed any VirtualBox or Vagrant software repos. So I'm going to show you how to install this from scratch. So the first thing that we want to do to get a local development environment with WordPress running on Ubuntu using VirtualBox and Vagrant would be to install dependencies like VirtualBox and Vagrant. So we'll start with VirtualBox, and there are several different ways that you could install VirtualBox. You could just download a file from Oracle's site. The problem with downloading a file is that it doesn't get updated. You could use the official repositories that Ubuntu already provides, and you could just download with apt to install it. The problem there is that their repos are apparently behind several versions of VirtualBox. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add Oracle's repository to our package manager, and we're going to install VirtualBox from Oracle's repositories, which means that if Oracle does update VirtualBox in the future, we'll be able to download those updates as well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually add the key for that repo to our machine. And you would have seen in previous steps, if you were watching, that I had removed that key prior to this. So I'm going to re-add it so that we can see what goes on when we do that. So we're going to use wget, and I'm going to run the command and then maybe talk about it here. So wget will go ahead and request this URL here, and it will pass in the quiet flag so that there isn't extra output kind of cluttering things here or polluting anything that's happening. And what we'll do is with what's returned from that URL, we'll actually output it not to a file, but to standard out, which is this additional dash here that is kind of like a POSIX system substitute for either standard in or standard out or previous, depending on what kind of command you're running. Here with wget, it's going to mean put the output to standard out. And then we're going to pipe that output to apt key add, and we're telling apt key add to read from standard in. So that same symbol over here means standard in for apt key add because it's expecting something to be passed in. So we're saying use standard input, which the contents of standard input should have been what was output to standard output from this previous command. So we go ahead and add that key, and that key will now show, if we do a list, I believe this is right, sudo apt key list, yep, that key will show in our list of repo keys here, so we can see VirtualBox right there, right? We just added VirtualBox's repo key. Now what we need to do with that key is we need to add the repository itself to our package management tool. So I'm I'm going to kind of copy and paste here, but this is a command which will add that repository, add apt repository, and it'll add the right one. Specifically, it's going to also add for our release of Ubuntu. So this command here, I'll run it real quick to show you lsb release with the CS flags will tell you I'm running vocal. And that makes sure that we actually get the right repo for our operating system hooked up here so that we can go out and, like you see, look for new packages or updates to packages on that repo. So now that repo has been added, and we can actually see that it should be now listed in our sources.list file under apt here. So if I go to sources.list and open that file, at the bottom you will see that we've added VirtualBox. So that repo has now been added, and there's vocal, my version of Ubuntu here. So okay, so now we just need to install VirtualBox now that repository has been added, and then we're going to do a very similar process for Vagrant, which is another piece of software. So all right, so let's install VirtualBox. Now we've added the repo, so we'll update apt first. Okay, and we should see that my new VirtualBox repo here is being hit, and it is. And now we want to install it. So I'm going to run apt install VirtualBox. So I wanted to show something real quick here. So I want to look for the right version of VirtualBox. I do name only. I think it's name only. So that's names only. So I'm using I'm going to do regex too. I think you can do regex here because there's all that other stuff in there. But I'm using apt cache search to look for the right version of VirtualBox that I want to install. I want to go for 6.1. Vagrant, the Vagrant that we're going to be using, the box specifies that you only have to have like VirtualBox 5.1.6 or greater, but we're going to go for the most recent version of VirtualBox here, not 6.0. So we'll go for 6.1. So just showing you that we have options there, and we can kind of see what's out there using apt cache search to choose which one we actually want to install. So, so we don't need to do sudo, I don't think. So we'll do apt install VirtualBox 6.1. Oops, I can type. Nope, we do need to do sudo. And I could just do sudo. Okay, so while that's installing, moving on to the next step, we're going to be looking at installing Vagrant. So we're working on VirtualBox right now. Vagrant would be next. And again, with Vagrant, there are several different options for how you want to install it. Some articles recommend downloading the .deb file, but again, it's pretty much going to be better to add it from a repo so that when there are updates to it, you would be able to get those updates onto the package that you've installed on your machine. Okay, so we will want to first add the repo key for Oracle to our machine. So let me grab that. We're going to use wget again. And that is not what I meant to do. I copied and pasted an older command here that I'd already had on, but I think we're good because I'm pretty sure that it was just already added. So let me check. I just added another repository, added the same repository I already had. Yeah, we're good. Okay, cool. So no, sorry, we want to use wget to add the Oracle key. So right here you can see we use wget with quiet option again to add the key to the VirtualBox repo, and we pipe that key that we downloaded to standard out and read it into apt key add from standard input. So now to add that repo, we'll use add apt repository again. Okay, and it's adding it. So we're adding VirtualBox repository, and we should see that it is up at the top here. You know what? Nope. We need to add Vagrant. I got mixed up again. We already added VirtualBox. That's where I was getting confused. So Vagrant. Okay. These commands, again, with Vagrant this time instead. So I'm also seeing some stuff in here that shouldn't be in there. Some options like fssl. So we only needed wget o and then the GPG file, and then pipe that to apt-key add. So we're adding Vagrant. And now we're going to add the repository since we have the key. Okay. Oh, you know what I'm doing? I keep copying and pasting, but it is not from down in my list. It is at the top of my list. There we go. So adding HashiCorp's repository, which is where we'll download Vagrant from. So we should see that now in the list of repositories that get hit every time we run like apt update or apt upgrade. So there's HashiCorp there, and that's where we're going to download Vagrant from. So we'll run apt-get update. Okay, and we can see that HashiCorp is in our list of repos, and it would be also at the bottom of our sources.list file. Yep, so there's HashiCorp, and the key would also be in our list of keys. Somewhere in here, there it is, HashiCorp. Okay, and now we can go ahead and actually install Vagrant itself from that repo. So we'll do sudo apt-get install Vagrant. Okay, so now Vagrant's installed. Okay, we need to install a Vagrant Box to run on, and that's like the machine or container that comes with everything that Vagrant needs to spin up an environment. And VCCW has already made one that's really good for WordPress, and they also have a set of files that comes with it, which will make sure that when you do spin it up, the most recent version of WordPress is downloaded and installed onto it. The most recent version of the WordPress CLI is downloaded and installed, and everything is started up and running for you. So you can go ahead and just start using it right away. So to do all of this, you could follow their steps, and they have instructions for using the environment. They explain what's installed, what comes with the environment, the requirements, which we just installed, Vagrant and VirtualBox. And we're going to go a little bit out of order just to better understand what's going into it. But the first thing that you would need to do is go ahead and install their box, which Vagrant will look for their box out on the Vagrant cloud for boxes. So if we give Vagrant the command to look for VCCW, I think it's Xenial 64, VCCW team, Xenial 64, it will go out to that cloud and download the box. So we're going to do Vagrant Box add VCCW team Xenial 64, and Xenial is just a release of Ubuntu, like I'm running Focal, right? So if I do LSB release, oops, I thought it was CB. It is not CB. It is CS Focal. We're going to be downloading a box that the virtual machine will be running Xenial. So that's where that sort of like postfix comes there. If we do Vagrant box add, what is it? It's VCCW team Xenial 64. Oh, I have already downloaded it. So sure, I'll show you how to do it from scratch, but this is where I messed things up before. Remove, force, and then it would be VCCW team. In other words, it's already saved on my machine. I'm going to show you the process to actually download it to your machine for the first time. Because Vagrant will reuse it once it's downloaded onto your machine, so you don't have to go through that process again, because this is actually one of the longer steps to download the box, which is why you don't want to have to do it again and again if possible. So you download it once, and once it's downloaded, your system will reuse it for different, even across different projects and environments, if it's listed as the base box to use or the box to use. So, okay, so while that downloads, the next step would be to install their files, VCCW Teams files, which are used to set up the box once it's downloaded to start it up. And like I said, to download the most recent version of WordPress and all the tools that you need, make sure that your web server and database are running. So that's all controlled in files. Specifically, a Vagrant file is the big one that's used. And you run that when you first bring up the box. Make sure that, not only is it the right OS and everything, which is part of the box itself, but all the right services are started and running and everything's ready for you to go. So, okay, so we added the box. We have to download the files for that are going to be used to configure the box once we start it up. So I already created a project folder, I think. Yep, and I had already moved stuff in here. I'll start from scratch here, but we'll do W, and I will force that. Okay, and what we're going to do is, so I figure out my window there, move from our downloads folder into our project folder here. Yeah, and it's one, I'd already downloaded before, but I'll show you here. We'll do one I just downloaded. C1s, there we go. We'll move that here. Okay, so now it's in here, and we will unzip that. That's gonna be kind of annoying, but it's fine. Okay, cool. All right, so there it is. It expanded into a new folder. So we'll go into there, and inside of this folder, we have some configuration files, and we have the Vagrant file, which is the big one. So the Vagrant file basically is what Vagrant will run. It'll read this and go through all the steps when we run Vagrant up to bring up our virtual machine. And it has some really important stuff, like, first of all, it reads any sort of environment or configuration files that are in the project, or that you've passed in even like through the command line when you first start it. And you can see that it actually merges configuration files together, which is nice because it's allowing you to provide more specific settings as you kind of get down. So you get your default file, your config file, and your site file, which just means that you can use the same configuration files again and again across different projects and just kind of tweak them within the more specific configuration files to override certain variables. So, and again, this is all put together by the VCCW team. They are using Vagrant. This is their Vagrant file, and they've used Vagrant and all the different directives Vagrant comes with to set up sort of a reusable template, if that makes sense. Something that's also tailored towards WordPress, because we can see here, even when they go to name their box, that's your virtual machine. They've got, WP box, and that's going to be likely the name of their VCCW team / Xenial 64 box. I'm pretty sure that's what that would be there. That's the box that we downloaded. So it's pointing to that, unless you tell it to point to something else, a different box you downloaded. You can see too, the Vagrant file sets up network stuff, connection stuff, so that you can actually connect to your box over SSH and, view sites served by your box in your browser. So that needs to be addressed and configured in the Vagrant file. Vagrantfile also takes care of, and you don't have to do this, but they do, which is nice, syncing folders between your host machine, which is your machine that you're seeing here, and the virtual machine, which just means that you can edit files on your machine using your text editor that you've installed or whatever stuff you want to use. And when you save, it'll be synced to the virtual machine, so you don't have to SSH the virtual machine and update the files there. And then the Vagrant file, their Vagrant file, VCCW's Vagrant file, checks to see whether there's a plugin called vagrant-hostsupdater. And that just makes sure that when you do start up your Vagrant file, that your local etc hosts file is automatically updated so that you can visit the site via a domain and URL, not just over having to type in the IP every time. So that's nice. It automatically updates your etc host file for you, and will change, I think, if you update that host name. And that's something that doesn't come with Vagrant by default. So we don't have this Vagrant host updater plugin installed yet, but we will in the next step before we start everything up. And then let's see what else is helpful. Oh, so provisioning. So when Vagrant file starts, basically make sure that not only does your box get loaded into memory and everything, but that you can run, but that certain provisioning scripts are run on that box when it started, to make sure that it's set up correctly. So here they've provided an option. You can see that they're checking if the file exists, but they've given you the option to run some of your own custom shell scripts by just creating a provision-pre.shell file in this project. It would run that on the guest machine, so that's the virtual machine that you're spinning up. And then they go ahead and use Ansible to run all these playbooks, which are, it's like an alternative to running custom shell scripts, but eventually kind of the end result is that it does the same thing, which is that it starts making sure software is installed on the guest or installing it if it's not. It downloads software, starts services if they're not started. So that's Ansible, just a way of managing all that without having to write like shell scripts. It actually is just more of a configuration way of managing it, which is nice because it saves you the hassle of writing shell scripts. And then you can see down here that they give you the option to sort of hook into Ansible and do some of your own configuration with Ansible. If you decide to, they check if the file exists if you've added it, and they let you run a post-provisioning shell script, which is just like the pre-provisioning shell script, another shell script that you can add to your project to do that, to run more stuff at the very end. And then they've got a run always shell script, which is just like the very last thing. Like this stuff always has to happen. And when I say always, it's a shell script of commands. You just write a shell script of commands that you want to run on the remote machine, the guest machine, the virtual machine, at the very end of it being set up. So, okay, and then if we look in, there's Ansible. So here's their Ansible configuration file. And this just sets some behavior for Ansible, which, like I said, is used to get software up and running. And we can see in the provisions folder that we've got some YAML files for mostly for Ansible. If we look at the playbook one, this just loads, it's Ansible, but it's loading some other YAML files that Ansible will use. So if we were to go look at those files, we've got, I did change into the, oh, no, I didn't. Sorry, my bad. Okay, we've got commands, middleware, WordPress.yaml. And if we just take a look at one of these real quick, you can see we're just defining things that need to happen on the guest when it's set up that Ansible will make sure happens, like downloading Composer, installing the WordPress CLI, installing some Ruby gems, npm, WordPress coding standards for like linting and stuff, WordPress internationalization tools, all that stuff. So YAML will take care of that. And I think the WordPress.yaml one is where it actually creates the database, creates the MySQL user. So it's installing WordPress, downloading WordPress core, using the WordPress CLI, which would have installed in the previous file that we were just looking at, the commands one, creating a WordPress configuration file, again, using the WordPress CLI, all of this is using the WordPress CLI, refreshing, resetting your database so it's blank. Yep, so all of that's handled by Ansible in these YAML files. Adding themes, options, date, all of that, configuring WordPress through the WordPress CLI. Okay. So once you have this installed, we do need to add that plugin. We don't have to, but it is nice to have it update, that Vagrant plugin update your Etsy host file. Whoops, should be Etsy hosts. Your Etsy hosts file with the, oh, look, it already did from my previous install, but it'll do this automatically. I didn't have to add these lines. The Vagrant file will automatically add the right lines to my Etsy's host file if I install a Vagrant plugin called Vagrant-hostsupdater. It checks to see if that's installed. So I will add that plugin to Vagrant. It doesn't come with a default install of Vagrant. It'll probably say I've already got it because I installed it in a previous step. Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure it already had it. But okay, so now all that remains is we got all of our plugins installed and everything. We just need to go to we're in it, but I'll just show you where we need to go. We need to be in a project with a Vagrant file. So that guy there, the Vagrant file, needs to be in this project, or we need to be in a directory beneath that or something like that. We need to be in a project that has a Vagrant file, because Vagrant will go up the directory tree looking for a Vagrant file to use when we run Vagrant up, which Vagrant up is just how we start a box to make it a virtual machine and get everything running. So you'll see that it is getting, it's naming our machine VCCW test, which is what we named it in our Vagrant file. That was the name in the Vagrant file. Already exists. I want to remove it. Yep. From the previous, the previous one. So Vagrant destroy, Vagrant global status shows you existing Vagrant machines. Vagrant destroy will let you destroy them. That one wasn't going to work anyways because I needed to change the BIOS settings. Okay, so to destroy that virtual machine, we run Vagrant up to get it started up again. Okay, so it knows the Vagrant file says use VirtualBox to get the virtual machine set up. That's the provider. Vagrant just lets you create those sets of instructions and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure you know what, I may need to prune it. To get rid of invalid entries. It says it's still there. That's interesting. Oh, you know what? It looks like it might have used my host file to determine that it was there. Yes. I might need to edit my host file. I'm going to edit it to get rid of these entries. I think they're just left over from my previous failed startup, and I think that might be what was confusing Vagrant. I was checking my host file to see if that machine already existed. Okay, so yeah, so it's getting that box, which wait, that already exists. Okay, it looks like we want to remove the VirtualBox machine because that was not deleted when we just uninstalled VirtualBox and Vagrant. So we'll want to do, let's delete them all. Well, let's just do the test one actually. So I want to do vbox manage, unregister, delete. That's the one that's conflicting. Pretty sure unregister is valid. Vbox manage, unregister. Hmm. Let's see here. I'm just gonna pipe this to less. Oh, unregistered VM. Okay. There we go. Now let's see if we can try Vagrant up again. Oops. Looks better. Okay, so it should be bringing our box up, and it's setting the right connection information here to use SSH to either run our scripts that we had set up to provision it, or for us to actually go in and SSH in after it's set up too. It'll create a key. If there's not one that exists, it'll generate a public and private key on your host machine and copy the public key to the guest, which is the virtual machine, so that you can SSH into the guest because you have the private key and public key pair on your machine. Okay, and it looks like VCCW, they set up tests to make sure things run too, I believe. Oh, this is all Ansible still. So Ansible is all those configuration files. We looked at the YAML files, is making sure things are installed and running. So right there, tasks. And this step can take a little bit too. Once you do Vagrant up, it's easier if you need to restart things, to do a Vagrant reload versus like a Vagrant halt and then Vagrant up again. Because I think with Vagrant reload, it doesn't run all of the provisioners. If you specify that provisioners should be run once, it won't run those if you just reload. But if you specify always, I think it always runs them if you do, even if you do a Vagrant reload. If you do a Vagrant halt and Vagrant up, I think that it will always run all provisioners, even the ones that are marked once. So right now you can see it's installing WordPress. Doing all sorts of WordPress things like flushing the rewrite rules. Okay, so now things should be up. We just want to test to make sure everything's good. So our virtual machine should be running, and we should be able to access it like in our browser, but also over SSH. So if we look at Etsy hosts, we should see it added records to point to the IP that it set up for this virtual machine. It says, okay, you can go to vccw.test to view that virtual machine, assuming there's a server running there. And look, there is a server running there, and it's running WordPress too. It's returning WordPress, so that's great. And other stuff we could test, we could try to connect, I think, MySQL from here. I think we can do MySQL. They had said in their configuration file and in their instructions for installing it, they had said that you can use like a default WordPress user, I think is for the user of the database. Let's see here. Here's all their information about we connect to. So I don't know if, so for the host name, I think we'd actually have to do w.test. We got our password. Oh, I don't even have MySQL installed. So we would need to SSH in and look at it. So what we could do is we could try to see if it's going to let us SSH in with Vagrant SSH. Yep, so now we're on the virtual machine. And now we should be able to do MySQL user was WordPress, and we want to pass a password. I don't think we need to say the host because it's local. They said the password was WordPress for both, and we're into MySQL. If you need to update schemas, right? Yeah. If you need to update MySQL on the guest machine. So, and just to clarify again with SSH, you can just use Vagrant SSH. They also have instructions here for how to SSH in, like let's exit the virtual machine, test, and the user is going to be Vagrant, and the password will be Vagrant, and the port will just be the default 22, so you don't have to put it in. So yeah, sure, we'll connect. Vagrant, and now we're also in. I didn't do Vagrant SSH, I just used the regular SSH command. Our files, let's see here, I'm trying to remember where the files are mounted. I think it depends on how it's set up. I think it's the Vagrant directory there. Yeah, I think. Yeah, WordPress. Yep. So here you can see that it's set everything up on the virtual machine under the Vagrant directory, root Vagrant, and it's added this WordPress folder, and that's where our WordPress files are installed. Now I think this might be synced with our how do I open a new? All right. I think it might be synced with our files on our local machine, but we can find out. There's a WordPress file right there. So that was added when things were installed, and the CLI was added too. So if we go in here, what's a great way we could test? We could go into like the themes and add something in the header, I guess. And think it installed a theme for us. Can't use WP here. I think I can use it here. How do I see the active theme? (2021). Oh, well, I'll mess with it, I guess. That's fine. So I'll go into, it's not really fine, but we'll go into it real quick. I'll figure it out. 21. Here, I'll back it up too. Okay, and let's just put something in there real quick to show that, yeah, this is the right thing. We'll Just do, there we go. So that was on my local machine, so you could use Visual Studio Code or whatever you want to use to edit that. Just gonna cp. Okay, get out of there. Yep, so that's pretty much it. You've got WordPress running. To get to your admin, it would just be, and I think they said the user was admin. There you go. Cool. Well, let me know if you have any questions. But that's pretty nice because everything's synced up and um, it's pretty quick. It's clean. Okay.